I want you to do me a favor.
Yeah, sure.
I want you to hit me as hard as you can.
Why?
Never been in a fight. You?
No, but that's a good thing.
No, it is not. How much can you know about yourself? You've never been in a fight.
So, Fight Club, 1999 movie, which the New York Times dubbed the defining cult movie of our time, 1999. And I think it's even more relevant today than it was then. Let's talk about why.
The first rule of Fight Club is you do not talk about Fight Club. The second rule of Fight Club is you do not talk about Fight Club.
So the movie had a budget initially of about $35 million, ended up costing somewhere between 63 and 65, and eventually, not easily, returned about 101 million in the box office. So all sounds good. But the movie was extremely controversial because it was regarded as promoting violence on the one side, and it was regarded as bringing to necessary public attention and giving a voice to a feeling of lack of identity in males.
If I saw something clever, like a little coffee table in the shape of a yin-yang, I had to have it. The Klipsk personal office unit, the Hovatrek home exerbike, or the Yohanneshav sofa with the string green stripe pattern.
And this is why I think it's even more relevant today. So why was the movie, why is it still popular? Why is it still a cult movie? Of course, a ripped, shirtless Brad Pitt doesn't hurt, and I'm sure that's still a contributor to its popularity. But, okay, if you haven't seen the movie and you don't know the major twist, I'd say stop here. I'll be very sorry to lose you, and I hope you come back. But please go and watch it, if that's you, and then come back, because I'm going to spoil basically the whole movie if you haven't seen it. Okay, so if you have, the main attraction in the movie initially is that the Edward Norton character, who's just referred to as the narrator. Now, in the original versions of the script, he was called Jack because he refers to representing the lifestyle and the issues of a character called Jack in a Reader's Digest article, but he's not actually named. So his character is doing everything right according to what he perceives in the media. Again, what he's being fed by mainstream media. Calvin Klein underwear, getting the right job, wearing the right clothes, buying the apartment, and most of all, equipping it with everything he can from IKEA. And he wonders about his identity in terms of IKEA, saying,
what kind of dining set defines me as a person?
He's doing everything right. And I think that resonates with us even more now coming out of COVID, where most of us have got pretty damn fed up with governments and unelected officials telling us what we could do, what we couldn't do, locking us in our homes. And basically it appears all in the interests of pharmaceutical companies selling us more drugs.
Can you please just give me something? Red and blue 2-in-alls, lipstick red second-alls.
And the reasons behind what these so-called authorities were telling us to do, backed up very intensely by the mainstream media, which some people are suggesting is a collusion, or that they're simply bought by the pharmaceutical companies to give these messages out, became increasingly unconvincing. And it gave us this feeling of dissatisfaction and being pushed around, not having an identity.
Everything's far away. Everything's a copy of a copy of a copy.
Now, this particular character, the narrator, he's done everything right and he's still not feeling satisfied. Robert Kiyosaki, the guy who wrote Rich Dad Poor Dad, highly recommended book, very controversial because it attacked some of the, let's say, some of the edicts for your life that came out of the Rockefeller-funded General Education Board indoctrination of people. I mean, Rockefeller himself said, I don't want a nation of thinkers, I want a nation of workers. And he's done everything right. But what Kiyosaki was pointing out, that in modern society, a woman knows when she becomes a woman because she knows when she's capable of having children. But modern Western society doesn't have very clearly defined rites of passage. Some religious communities still do, but For instance, I grew up in the UK. At 16, you could have sex as long as the other person was under 18, buy cigarettes. You couldn't drive till you were 17. You weren't legally an adult till you were 18. You couldn't be a member of parliament or I think a company director until you were 21. I just remember this incident where I grew up in a little village with a post office, which I'd been to since I was 5 years old, and everybody knew everybody. And I went into the post office and there was a young mother with a kid, maybe 5 years old. And they turned around from the counter and the kid was dawdling and the mother said, get out of the man's way. And I turned around wondering who this man was we had to get out of the way of. And then I realized she was talking about me. And I was 17 at the time, I think, and I wasn't sure. I was validated, but unsure. So he's right, we don't have that. Now, he suggests that in modern society, in Western society, you are acknowledged as an adult when you're able to get debt, which is usually 18, or depending on the kind of debt, might be 21. And society is measuring you by debt. Now, we'll come back to that at the end of the story because that's particularly relevant to the, maybe not controversial, but there are issues surrounding the end of the movie, particularly regarding the alternative versions relating to China. So this debt concept is very important in the Fincher theatrically released movie. And we'll come to that just now. So our character narrator, he's a product recall specialist for an automobile company, and he's traveling an awful lot. He's feeling all this angst. He's jet lagged all the time. He gets narcolepsy and he visits the doctor. The doctor tells him basically there's no pills for it.
Hey, come on. I'm in pain.
You want to see pain? Swing by First Methodist Tuesday nights. See the guys with testicular cancer. That's pain.
So he starts going to support groups of people dying of cancer and other diseases. And in a strange way, he finds the solace that he doesn't get in his life and for his problem. And he says, you know, he ends up finding solace in the bitch tits of the character played by Meatloaf, where he meets Marla Sykes as Helena Bonham Carter, is a semi-narcissistic personality, but with similar problems to our main character, the narrator, and also faking her sickness to go to these support groups. And they agree to, he gets irritated because she's there and basically she calls him out, he calls her out. So now they feel a little bit awkward. So they agree to go to different support groups. So the whole thing is just so inappropriate. And at the same time, it's understandable. And at this stage, we see subliminal flashes of the Tyler Durden character, Brad Pitt's character, appearing in certain sequences as this. And this is where I say, I'm spoiling the movie here, so spoiler alert. The hallucinated character, alter ego that he creates starts to feature fractured images of this character appearing in various sequences and in the background of shots, etc. Now, that character materializes as apparently a real character that the narrator meets, apparently a real person he meets on the flight, a soap salesman. And when the narrator's apartment is blown up, and we find out later it's essentially by himself in a gas explosion, he goes for a drink with Tyler Durden, talks, requests to stay at his place because his apartment had been blown up. And then we get that amazing scene when Tyler Durden asks the narrator, he has a condition for him to stay with him, and he says,
I want you to do me a favor.
Yeah, sure.
I want you to hit me as hard as you can.
Why?
Never been.
and that's where the Fight Club element develops. And that's where the narrator finds his validation, his sense of purpose, his sense of reality. And as the club grows, then it becomes a community, a cult almost, a tribe, and they find belonging. Now, this is why I think this is extremely relevant to today, as much as it was, and perhaps more so than it was in the 90s, because now we have the media pushing LGBTQ woke agenda very aggressively, and we have the whole trans issue, and even more than it was before, men are in this situation. And what is toxic masculinity? What's toxic about being masculine? A bunch of guys running down the street, young lads, drunk, causing trouble, throwing trash, abusing people, getting into fights. Yeah, that's toxic. Nobody wants that in the society, but this is part of the animals that we are. So what are we supposed to do with it? And people, I think, feel, a lot of men just feel like, well, what am I supposed to be? What is the definition of an acceptable man that makes me feel good about who I am? And there's so much controversy about this now that this movie is dead on. And I can tell you, as someone who's been in the ring multiple times in combat sports, it's a visceral environment. Everything changes when you step into a makeshift or professional arena where somebody else is going to try to hurt you, and you don't have any doubts anymore. You know exactly, and you know what's at stake. Hopefully, in the situation, it's not a fight to the death, the old gladiatorial combat, but your body doesn't know that. And deep down inside your brain, your amygdala and the primitive parts of your brain, the reptile brain, they don't know that. They just know this is a fight or flight situation, and it takes over.
You weren't alive anywhere like you were there. But Fight Club only exists in the hours between when Fight Club starts and when Fight Club ends.
And this is why sports were invented, so that young men could participate in these kind of rivalries and practice their physicality without reducing the number of warriors or farmers or fathers in your community. So it is part of that masculine definition. And the end of that, and even a sport like I used to play quite high level club rugby, and it's the same story. You're giving everything. It's a combat situation. You're totally committed. You're after the guy on the other side. It's personal combat. And you put everything into it, all your physicality, all your effort. And at the end of the game, you're exhausted. And all that is depleted. And even if you lose, everybody lines up, shakes hands. There's never any acrimony at the end, very rarely, at the end of a rugby game. And most likely you go into the clubhouse and have a beer with the other guys, and you feel a sense of camaraderie with the opposition and respect, especially if they've had some very good players, and even if they beat you. And I think that's a positive thing. It's an expression and a celebration of physicality and what men can do. A synthesized representative combat where nobody dies except in very rare situations, and a bonding, a teamwork is generated, especially in a sport like rugby where each player has a different role, and you learn to appreciate that the small quick guy is just as valuable as the big strong guy, and the various skills that go together to make a successful team. Now when the narrator realizes that he is Durden.
Who do you think I am?
You're Mr. Durden.
He also realizes that that Durden is not Marla's creation.
Yeah.
Marla, it's me. Have we ever done it?
You fuck me, then snub me. You love me, you hate me. You show me a sensitive side, then you turn into a total asshole. Is that a pretty accurate description of our relationship, Tyler?
He's got an idea maybe that she's created Tyler Durden, and you never see the three of them together. And they're very careful with the shots. You don't see over-shoulder shots with the narrator and Tyler Durden in the same shot, because when the revelation is made, it has to fit. So they couldn't have been in the same room at the same time. Then he's making the soap. Then he reveals that he's making the soap from liposuction fat. So the irony of selling back to wealthy people expensive soap that's actually made from their fat, and not criticizing people who are overweight for various reasons, but generally a fat person has overindulged and is therefore paying to remove the overindulgence, and then he's selling them back their own body parts. The irony of that is just perfect. But they go too far. And when Durden realizes that when the narrator realizes that the Tyler Durden plan is to blow up the buildings which house the records of people's credit card debts.
You morons. You're running around in ski masks trying to blow things up? What did you think was gonna happen?
He wants to stop it. Now, going back to what Robert Kiyosaki said about the acknowledgement of being able to have debt is your rite of passage for men in society. That's why they want to attack that situation to set people free. Now, perhaps the modern version of that might be debts from COVID, or it might be student loans. I'm not quite sure. Those are not necessarily involuntary, the student loan part. So do they deserve to be wiped? That's another issue. That's controversial. But that's the focus. It's this modern culture of debt. And Tyler Durden wants to upset that, set people free from their credit cards. The irony is, though, that you give most people that kind of freedom, and probably most of them would jump straight back into it with a new credit card. And I think it's the representation that the narrator gets to a point where his id, the crazy impulsive part of his personality, which he was neglecting, and therefore Tyler Durden became not real, but hallucinated into his life.
You and I started Fight Club together. Do you remember that? It's as much mine as it is yours, you know.
Is this about you and me?
Yeah, I thought we were doing this together.
You're missing the point. This does not belong to us. We are not special.
Fuck that. You should have told me.
His ego, which was his self-image coming from his IKEA apartments, etc., and then his super ego, which makes the decision, realizes that's not the right path, but that there is a problem here, but wants to stop it. In the movie version, at the end, when the narrator tries to explain a little bit to Marla, who's brought to the scene to observe the buildings collapsing, he holds her hand, and people see this as a representation that he is accepting his feminine side. There's also people claiming that this means that he must be bisexual or gay. That's just another interpretation. So if he's destroyed or damaged the id, taken control of the situation, unfortunately he has to suffer the consequences of what allowing his id to go crazy has resulted in, which is the destruction. But he is integrated with the feminine side. Now, we don't know in the movie if they are culpable or found culpable, particularly the narrator character, for what he's done, or they just, whereas my mind, the Pixies is playing, and that's the end of the movie.
You met me at a very strange time in my life.
With your feet on the air,
Which leaves us with questions, which I'll come back to in a second, because I think that's a very important issue in becoming a cult movie. Now, we've got globalists, the WEF, climate change zealots on both sides, pro and anti, people who are wholeheartedly believing in it and thinking that, as they always forecast, 5 years from now the earth will be uninhabitable. Or the other guys pointing out that they've been trotting out this stuff since the 80s and nothing much has changed, so maybe it's not right. We've got all this, we've got all the controversy coming out, the aftermath of COVID, and the allegations of corruption and misinformation, disinformation, collusion, all the way to the top levels. This is why the movie is powerful today, because as the narrator and Marla stand there at the end, hand in hand, watching everything collapse around them, it's how we feel. It's how we look at the world right now, and we're like, what the hell is going on? We've got a war on the doorstep of Europe. We've got unlikely alliances being formed. We've got people dumping the dollar as the reserve currency. The world we used to know is collapsing around us. So what do we have? And that's why this cult movie is very relevant to today. Now, when the movie was released in China, Tencent modified the ending completely. So they took out the collapsing buildings, and just after, just when the narrator shoots himself, the movie basically stops, and a text comes up on the screen saying, of course, the diligent and hardworking police stopped the problem, stopped the Project Mayhem, stopped the explosions, and arrested everybody, and he's now gone to a mental home. And the people were really upset about this. I mean, it fits the Chinese totalitarian regime approach to these things. You can't allow, in their minds, people to be standing up to authority, creating mayhem, blowing up buildings. They're not going to stand for that, and they don't want a movie that's going to promote that. But what's interesting is that that's actually closer to the ending of the Chuck Palahniuk, sorry if I'm saying his name wrong, book, which has the narrator shoot himself and then come around he's actually in a mental hospital, but he thinks he's dead, has a long conversation with God about the meaning of life, then realizes he is in a mental hospital, he's not dead. And many of the workers come to him in the hospital and say, we're Project Mayhem. It's still going, and Tyler Durden is coming back. So the Chinese version was in some ways closer. However, they did re-release it with the close to almost but 1 minute of the theatrical release. Again, just more fuel for the cult movie scenario. So we've got we've got the situation where we've got this individual versus government, which has always been part of society. We've got transnational corporations trying to take over the world, the globalists. We've got this ongoing fight. Hasn't been removed since it was raised in the 90s. And what does it mean to be a modern man? What is admirable? What is the media promoting? What is TikTok doing? Why is TikTok so controversial? It's basically, there's no real denying that it's a tool of Chinese propaganda. And they are very much supporting LGBTQ plus and trans agendas everywhere else in the world on TikTok, and the Chinese supporting all these. And people think, oh, it's the Chinese trying to present a more modern image and show that they're nice people. Yet TikTok in China is reinforcing the values of masculine men, you standing up for traditional values, taking your place in society, protecting women. So what's going on here? People are saying, well, they're trying to emasculate and weaken the Western nations and bolster up the traditional old-fashioned role of males in China. Is that what's going on? This is what we're dealing with at the moment. And then somebody pointed out to me the other day, you look at that situation in just east of Europe, the two nations having a war there, the people who are forced into defending their country with weapons and the people who are forced by their dictator to participate in an invasion, most of them are men. We have sexual equality, allegedly, and I know there are women fighting on the one side to defend their country, but where's the equality? It's gone out the window. All of a sudden, the women who are leaving those countries, and it's women with their children. I mean, men are fleeing as well. They don't want to be drafted, or ideologically they don't believe in the conflict. But it's the men who are dying in their tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. So what's that about? We're not allowed to be masculine. Oh, that's toxic, except when there's a war. And then all you guys all go off and die. It's complicated. And this is why this movie is a movie for now. This is why, as we said at the beginning, New York Times said it was the defining cult movie of our time. And the reason that it still is because those questions are still valid. They haven't been answered. And when you come to the end of a movie, you do want a satisfaction at the end of the movie. You want what they refer to as an unexpected but inevitable ending. Something that kind of surprises you, but you feel like, yeah, it had to be that way. That's appropriate. But the more questions you have, remember the David Lynch series, the TV series, Twin Peaks, and it had everybody talking. In those days, it was released 1 week, one episode 1 week at a time. For the next week, when everybody had 5 minutes to chat around the water cooler or the coffee machine, they were asking questions about, does it mean this? Or why did he do that? Or is this? And that was part of the entertainment. And I remember finishing that series still pretty confused about most of it, but it still worked. And Fincher's done that very well in this movie. Particularly when they released, which made the movie successful for the studios, was the double DVD collector's kit marked Fight Club, with all the explanations, the backstory, and Fincher was very much involved in producing that because he wanted the movie to be a success, and the studios were kind of disappointed with his performance. And that's why it still remains today as cult, because it has asked and is still asking those vital questions about individual versus society, and particularly in this case, what is the acceptable aspirational role of the modern man? And there are so many people who are not comfortable with what's being pushed down the throats by modern media, but nobody's really, there are a few people, but not many people standing up with a strong alternative definition. It's all about what we're not. You're not allowed to do this, you're not allowed to be like that. And where is the definition? Where is it? How do we measure ourselves? How do we know? How do we feel good about ourselves and know that society accepts us, respects us, rewards us, and motivates us, and we feel good about who we are? And that's the question asked in Fight Club, those questions. And they're still relevant now, they're still being asked, and answers are still needed. That's why it's a cult movie. And I realize I have broken the first rule of Fight Club.
Gentlemen, welcome to Fight Club.